My sister has spent years turning a blind eye to her kids' increasingly criminal behavior, constantly making excuses while they vandalize property, steal, and terrorize the neighborhood. After countless warnings and sleepless nights, I finally had enough. I called the cops, and now the entire family is furious with me for betraying them. Upon my return from work, I observed that the shed entrance was ajar and the clasp I employed to secure it had been tampered with. Inside, I kept numerous sacks brimming with empty beverage containers. My substantial soda consumption meant I had accumulated a considerable quantity, intending to redeem them at the recycling center soon. It wasn't merely the cans that were gone from the shed, however. Several gardening implements, a large knife, and a fuel container were also absent. I checked my surveillance recordings, and in the early hours, just after my departure for work, I witnessed my 3 nephews forcing entry into my shed. They used a mallet to shatter the fastener, subsequently absconding with the cans and the other belongings. I telephoned my sibling, and she and her spouse refuted their children's involvement until I arrived at their residence with the video evidence from my cameras. They were incensed with their offspring for pilfering from me and for truancy in the process. I recovered the other items, though the fuel container was empty. They had already converted all the containers into cash. I desired the funds from the recycling, but my nephews had already squandered it on electronic games and sugary snacks. I insisted on knowing their earnings from the cans, which amounted to almost $200. I informed my sister that she now owed me over $200 for the cans and the damaged locking device. My sister and Bill transitioned from being upset with their children to inventing justifications for them, then becoming indignant with me for seeking reimbursement, despite my awareness of their 3 children and home loan obligations. I stated it was either reimbursement or I would involve law enforcement and pursue legal action. They instructed me to leave, and I responded that they had 48 hours to determine how to compensate me before I contacted the authorities. My nephews are larcenists and have previously taken things from me, which is why I installed the cameras. What my nephews did was undeniably incorrect, yet I also recognize that my sister and Bill are genuinely unable to afford to repay me, and they are incessantly contacting my mobile device, labeling me cruel for presenting the ultimatum, knowing they are almost financially depleted after the festive season. I questioned if I was wrong for acting this way. Update 1. Indeed, I did go to the police. I attempted to collaborate with my sister and Bill when I called them this morning, as I preferred not to wait until after their work hours to speak with them. Not only did they decline any proposed method of restitution, but they actually asserted that it was my responsibility for having the containers there initially. They claimed I enticed my nephews with the prospect of money. I was infuriated and declared our relationship over. Subsequently, they recommenced barraging my phone with calls. My eldest nephew transmitted an image of himself holding a soda can and extending his middle finger towards me, and that was the decisive moment. I proceeded to the police station and submitted a formal complaint. I provided them with a duplicate of the video footage depicting my nephew stealing from my shed, handed over the broken lock they shattered, and presented all the text messages, which were screenshotted and also furnished as proof. I even supplied the photograph my eldest nephew sent me of him gesturing impolitely. I am unsure if my nephews have been apprehended yet, but I am confident they will be. Perhaps some public service will alter their demeanor. I did convey to the police my concern that my nephews had taken the large knife, but it was as I anticipated. They categorized it as a utility, especially since they took numerous other genuine implements besides the large knife. They also took some pruning shears, a steel raking tool, 2 digging implements, one of which was a folding camping type, a full 2-gallon fuel container, an inexpensive power drill I acquired for about $5 secondhand, an electric hedge trimmer, and a small electric saw that was also used. They did not interfere with the lawnmower, string trimmer, extension cords, or the antiquated radio I had in there. I have no idea why they took what they did, but I suppose they believed they could resell them or something similar. However, I retrieved all of that, excluding the fuel that was in the gas can. I have no idea what they used it for, but it was aged fuel anyway. After their initial unauthorized entry into my shed, they carried away what they could by hand, and then they returned with some shopping conveyances that I surmised they also pilfered. It required a few excursions to remove all the containers, and they did not even bother to attempt to close the door when they were finished. Regardless, my nephews are now in legal difficulty for unauthorized entry, grand theft, and harassment. I am certain that either today or tomorrow, my phone will be inundated with calls when the authorities come for those youths, but I stated it was my definitive stance, and I meant it. I no longer even care if I recover the funds. They had their opportunity. I have already replaced the shed's locking mechanism with a considerably more robust one, and the large knife will no longer be stored in the shed. I have also conversed with a few of my neighbors about the incident. They informed me that empty containers have actually been disappearing around the vicinity recently. If anyone had a bag of cans left outside, it would be stolen. I cannot confirm if my nephews were the culprits, but if they were, then they have been engaged in this activity for months. I have also spoken with my relatives, and they are equally exasperated with my sister and Bill, so they are all supporting me, which is reassuring. I was concerned they would turn against me since I filed the police complaint, but no, I simply received many affirmations and acknowledgments that it was high time those youths faced consequences. I was not the sole family member they had stolen from. Many in the comments attempted to suggest that I should propose my nephews repay the $200 through labor. There was no chance I would do that. The small miscreants detest performing any task they are disinclined to do and would simply loiter, grumbling and acting as though the world opposed them, and they would necessitate constant supervision, which is another activity I wish to avoid. Furthermore, I had prohibited them from my residence for valid reasons. The pilfering commenced with sustenance and treats, then progressed to digital video discs and electronic games, which prompted me to begin marking my initials on cases and discs with permanent markers, enabling me to demonstrate when my nephews had taken something of mine. They attempted the "oh, he lent them to us" excuse on a few occasions, but I consistently intervened and compelled them to return the items they had appropriated, for which they always behaved as if I were unreasonable. Subsequently, when they were made to offer apologies to me each time, they were the most insincere apologies I have ever encountered. The definitive incident that resulted in my nephews being barred from my home occurred when they utilized the hidden spare key to my residence to gain entry and purloined 3 six-packs of my preferred blood orange ale from my refrigerator, concurrently ransacking my kitchen for anything else they desired. One of them defecated in my lavatory and not only neglected to flush, but also deliberately urinated on the floor. They attempted to deny involvement, but I was aware it was them. The ale they had stolen was even concealed in their room. My sister and Bill barely disciplined them and essentially offered me an equivalent of "boys will be boys," then rebuked me when I declared that they and their children were no longer welcome in my dwelling ever again, and that is precisely why I acquired the cameras. When I had them installed, I informed no one, which proved to be a very astute decision, as my nephews had no inkling of their presence when they forced entry into my shed. I suppose I was their most accessible target. When I can afford it, I intend to procure additional surveillance equipment for the interior of my house as well. Update 2. My nephews were indeed apprehended on Saturday. Police arrived at their dwelling, and my sister and Bill were compelled to grant them entry due to a warrant. Apparently, all 3 of my nephews transformed from arrogant small miscreants to weeping like infants as they were being handcuffed. I am aware of this because a neighbor with whom I am acquainted, who is somewhat friendly with my sister, was present to witness it, and shortly after the apprehension, my sister and Bill were once again inundating my phone with calls. They were unable to secure their children's release from custody until Monday morning, and now the boys are being formally accused of grand theft, deliberate property destruction, defacement, and harassment. The police approached this entire matter quite seriously, as there had been grievances regarding my nephews for some time, but nothing had been substantiated until now. In the preceding months, bags of containers have actually been disappearing throughout the vicinity. I do not know if it was my nephews or not. They are probable suspects, and with word of their arrest disseminating, let us hope other neighbors with surveillance cameras come forward with additional footage. My sister and Bill also appeared at my residence. I declined to open the entrance and informed them that this entire situation transpired because they are enablers who refuse to hold their children accountable for their conduct. That prompted them to simply shout and pound on my door more until I threatened to contact the authorities regarding them as well, and since I have already done so, they now understand I am serious. Thus, they departed without further disturbance, but they reverted to bombarding my phone. I did not block my sister or Bill. Instead, I resolved to simply preserve all the communications they send me, as I have decided to pursue legal action against them in small claims court over this. I do not genuinely require or desire the monetary compensation, and I have already replaced the destroyed clasp with a considerably superior one. Nevertheless, the youths are not the only ones who require a lesson. Ultimately, I hope to place them in a sufficiently challenging position that they learn never to provoke me again. I also possess the full backing of my family in this. My parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. are all supporting me in this, as my nephews have also pilfered from them, and after prohibiting my nephews from my house, some of them followed suit. I am going to advocate for my nephews to receive public service, and the rationale is not merely because it is a sound idea, but also because I know that they will detest that the most. Whenever compelled to perform any kind of labor they are disinclined to do, they simply loiter, grumbling and acting as though the entire world is against them. so hardly anything ever gets accomplished. Perhaps a few hundred hours of unpaid labor will instill some manners in them. They have been pampered far too excessively. Update 3. Well, this is remarkably uneventful. I had anticipated that my sister and Bill would dig their heels in even deeper after everything that had already transpired, but they actually yielded. I initiated a legal claim against them in small claims court for the actions of their children. In the suit, I was requesting $500. This sum encompassed the stolen containers, the damaged fastening device, the cost of the replacement fastener, which was a significantly better and more expensive one, the court filing fees, and emotional distress compensation for the harassment. A friend whose father is a legal professional provided me with a complimentary consultation and affirmed that I possessed a very compelling case due to the camera footage I have of both my nephews taking things from me and of my sister and Bill pounding on my front door, in addition to all the messages they sent me. When my sister and Bill were served with the papers, they telephoned me in a state of panic. They asserted that I could not do this to them, so I retorted that this is the consequence they are enduring for failing to parent their children and allowing them to become entitled small pilferers, and if they wish to converse with me again, it would either be when I saw them in court or if they chose to pay me the $500 for which I am suing. Then I concluded the call. Well, yesterday evening, I had some companions visiting after work. We were simply relaxing and viewing a film. None of us were in the mood for electronic games as we were fatigued from the day and desired a tranquil evening. But then I received a knock at the entrance. When I looked outside, there stood my sister and Bill, and they appeared quite disheartened. I opened the door but kept the screen door secured, then inquired as to their presence at my residence. They informed me that they are weary of conflict because everyone is opposed to them and fully conceded how severely they had erred by permitting this situation to escalate as far as it did, and they simply wished to reconcile. My friends were fully visible behind me, thus serving as witnesses to this. Bill then slid an envelope through a narrow opening in the door that contained $500 in $50 denominations. He stated it was from his personal savings account, then told me that henceforth they would ensure my nephews are appropriately disciplined for their actions. They did not ask me to withdraw the charges, but pleaded with me to at least be merciful. I stated I was only advocating for public service, which is quite lenient, and if we cooperate for that, then hopefully the magistrate will concur. They sighed and stated they would cooperate if that was all I desired, then departed without creating any disturbance. My friends all commended me for standing my ground. Others in my family later did the same. That is when I learned from my parents that they had actually threatened to disinherit my sister if she and her spouse did not implement some positive changes, so now they are. It may be an enforced alteration, but it is the best we will probably observe from them. My mother visited my sister and Bill after they had repaid me as well. She informed me that my nephews were not engaged in electronic games. In fact, every single item related to electronic gaming was put away somewhere, and so was the television that my nephews would use for gaming and watching films. All three nephews were predominantly in their rooms and were quite impolite and unwelcoming to their grandmother, but my sister claims they are coping with the circumstances. So yes, I have withdrawn the legal action now that I have been compensated what I desired, but my nephews are still proceeding to court for grand theft and are now receiving the upbringing they should have been receiving long ago. I have also been assured that they will not be approaching my residence again anytime soon and are strictly permitted only at school or at home. My nephews will not be welcome anywhere near my house for an extended period. My sister and Bill are now essentially compelled to provide the parenting they should have already been supplying, and everyone else in the family has been on my side about this because my nephews had basically caused everyone to dislike them. Update 4. To begin, yes, I did acquire more surveillance equipment. One camera I installed directly above the shed, so it appears I have the entire area monitored. I wish I could assert that my sister and Bill, as well as my nephews, have learned from this entire ordeal, but that is not entirely accurate, especially for my eldest nephew, who simply could not relinquish his desire for retaliation against me, and he foolishly attempted to achieve it. Here is what transpired. They did not receive more than 100 hours each because I had been reimbursed by their guardians when we settled out of court, so the judge essentially expedited the case. My nephews ended up collecting litter and performing tasks around several local public recreational areas, and the individual overseeing them, I heard, was a retired military instructor, so they experienced no enjoyment whatsoever. My eldest nephew constantly exhibited his issues with authority and engaged in shouting matches with everyone who instructed him to work. His father had to be summoned merely to make the boy pick up a raking tool. The youth openly blamed me for his predicament, and his brothers were both initially aligned with him. But after a period, they realized that he is simply irrational and entitled, and they no longer wish any involvement. So my two younger nephews ceased following his lead because it finally dawned on them just how incorrect their actions were. The difficulty is that my sister and Bill attributed the family discord to me, which did not end favorably for them, as no one in the family supported their stance on it. All accountability was placed upon them and their inadequate parenting, and without me to accuse, they simply became quiet and resentful. Half the family does not wish to associate with them, and now their own children are divided because the eldest refuses to change. It escalated to such a degree that my eldest nephew resorted to something so incredibly foolish that you will scarcely believe it. In the dead of night, he clandestinely departed and assailed my residence with a pair of his father's clawed striking tools. I say a pair because he literally wielded one in each hand. The first action he took was to begin smashing the new fastening device on my shed, and it did not break, but he severely damaged it to the point where it was no longer functional, and I subsequently had to remove it with cutting shears. He also inflicted substantial damage to the shed entrance with the striking tool claws. I awoke to the sounds of the striking tools and contacted the authorities after peeking out my bedroom window and observing someone outside hitting the shed, though I did not initially realize it was him because his face was covered with a chilling-looking mask. He noticed the bedroom illumination activate and hurled one of the striking tools through my window. There was shattered glass everywhere, and I am fortunate I did not lacerate my feet on any of it because I was without footwear. Then my nephew commenced striking my back entrance with the remaining striking tool. He caused major damage, fracturing the handle and the window on the door, and also tore into the door itself with a striking tool claw. I was concerned the door would not withstand, so I shouted that the police were en route, and he fled before their arrival. The night vision on my camera revealed it was him. He wore a mask, but was also clad in his school hooded sweatshirt and his Nike footwear, which were also quite distinguishable, as his brothers do not possess a similar pair. His fingerprints were also found on the striking tool he tossed at my window. My nephews had already all been fingerprinted when they were apprehended the first time, so police matched the ones on the striking tool to him. When the authorities came for my eldest nephew, he obviously denied it was him, but there is no one else it could have been. The other striking tool was discovered in his room, along with the garments and mask he wore, all of which were seized as evidence. The mask depicted a galactic character I was informed is named the Grand Inquisitor. This time, however, his parents did nothing to attempt to shield him, and they did not try to shift the blame onto me either. They simply permitted their son to be taken away, screaming. I was not present to witness the apprehension, but I was told by my sister that my eldest nephew was alternating between weeping that he had done nothing wrong and screaming that it was all my fault and he had to retaliate against me. The boy had to undergo a serious psychological evaluation and was determined to be potentially bipolar. This does not genuinely excuse his actions, however. Later, when he was properly diagnosed with bipolar disorder, he began attributing everything he did wrong to that and behaved as though he should be condemned simply for receiving treatment for it. But he ended up spending a month in juvenile detention. They ensured my nephew was properly medicated, and he pleaded guilty to avoid further court proceedings in exchange for additional community service and mandatory counseling, as well as probation. This time, his father came to my residence and personally replaced the fractured window and door, though he barely uttered a word to me while performing the task. My two younger nephews are still excluding their older brother from practically everything, and he still has not offered an apology for assailing my home either. He is also regrettably repeating a school year due to the significant decline in his academic performance, which his parents are still very displeased about. My two younger nephews visited on their own in July to personally apologize to me. They stated that they always merely followed their brother's leadership, and he made everything they were doing seem so enjoyable. But the penalties for the offenses are not worth the kind of amusement they were experiencing, and they want nothing to do with it anymore. They desire their fun uncle back and inquired if we could begin anew. I said we could, but they would have to regain my trust, which they cheerfully agreed to. My eldest nephew celebrated his 17th birthday a few months ago and essentially received nothing, not even a confectionery. It was part of his discipline for what he had done. I can only imagine how much money he has cost his parents in the past year alone. He led his brothers to pilfer from me and then destroyed my bedroom window and back entrance. I imagine in total, with the lawsuit I had previously filed and replacing both the door and window, it cost them over $1,000. Doors and windows are not inexpensive. Meanwhile, my youngest nephew had his birthday a month after that and received a new off-road bicycle among his gifts. This greatly distressed my eldest nephew, and he punctured the tires on the bicycle with a kitchen cutting implement, which landed him in even more difficulty. I possess some knowledge regarding bicycle repair, so I procured new inner tubes and tires for the bicycle and installed them. So the bicycle is fine, and my nephew expressed much gratitude for my repair work. My eldest nephew resorted to attempting to abscond because he was no longer being enabled. He simply walked out, mounted his bicycle with a knapsack full of belongings, and rode away. His parents swiftly reported him as missing because he had left a farewell letter that essentially blamed me and his bipolar condition for all his troubles. In the letter, he declared that he could not wait until he was 18 to escape from all of us, so he was doing us a favor by eliminating himself sooner. But he returned 3 days later without his bicycle or knapsack and appearing battered. He would not disclose to anyone what had transpired. We still do not know, but he was severely reprimanded for continuously using me as a scapegoat for his personal issues, because blaming me was the first thing he did after his return. I did not compel him to pilfer from me. I did not compel him to assault my residence. I did not compel him to flee. That was all his own doing, and he nearly ended up back in juvenile detention for absconding because he violated his probation, but he escaped easily somehow. Currently, he spends his days primarily in his room when not in school or performing chores or attending counseling. He completed his community service, but his probation will endure until he is 18. He received some leniency for being diagnosed as bipolar, but it could not absolve him, and believe me, he attempted many times. Once they informed him of his condition, it became his justification for everything. But many individuals live their entire lives with that same psychological condition and never engage in the kinds of actions he did. I have been mending my relationship with my 2 younger nephews, but I do not wish to be around the eldest at all, and the sentiment is clearly reciprocal on his part. I have only seen him once in person in the past few months, and he glared at me with more animosity than I have ever witnessed from anyone before stomping away. He cannot portray me as the antagonist anymore without being challenged, so there is not much he can do other than simply attempt to navigate this. For the most part, he has entirely withdrawn since school commenced. I am told he barely speaks even at school. My other nephews inform me he is being mocked and shunned, which I do not believe will aid his improvement. My sister and Bill are also not on the best terms with me at present, but they cannot precisely assign any blame to me either. They understand it was entirely due to them and their inadequate parenting. I have essentially compelled them to be more engaged in their children's lives, which they should have been doing already. They frequently complain of being exhausted from work and supervising their children, so whenever we converse lately, it is always uncomfortable and strained. They do not visit my residence or I theirs, but we do encounter each other at my parents' house, and our mother insists we maintain civility there, which I have no issue with. My 2 younger nephews have regained most of their entitlements. They have their television and electronic games back, but my eldest nephew is not permitted access to them at all. I am told he possesses some electronic entertainment in his room, but of what nature I do not know. I simply know he spends most of his time in there unless he is required to be elsewhere. My eldest nephew is also not welcome practically anywhere in the family anymore. I have recently heard from my parents that they do not even wish to see him on Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve this year, because they are weary of his conduct and trivial pilfering. I suppose I can comprehend that, but even I feel it is somewhat severe. My sister and Bill also feel the same, as they are threatening to boycott if he cannot attend either holiday. I cannot tolerate that youth and would not desire him in my home either, so I can understand why they have made that decision, but I do not believe excluding him from everything and everyone will cause him to improve. It will require a considerable duration for my eldest nephew to mend relationships, if they can even be mended at all. As things stand, he may attempt to abscond again once he reaches adulthood, unless the last instance intimidated him too much to try it again, but hopefully things will ameliorate for him in due course if it is not too late to correct his behavior. I may not have affection for him, but he is still my nephew, and I care, but I am somewhat powerless to intervene. So for now, the most I can do is simply refrain from interfering and offer assistance where I can. Update 5. I had hoped to provide a more positive update for everyone after the holidays, but matters did not genuinely improve. They initially did, then deteriorated once more. It required some time, but everything is more or less satisfactory now. I did not post earlier because I considered it better to wait. I composed most of this months ago, but decided I would wait a little longer to see if the situation would ameliorate. But then I waited too long and simply forgot until recently. So here is hopefully the concluding update regarding the cunning individual who enticed his nephews with a shed brimming with containers. I would offer a summary, but there is simply far too much for that. So if you wish to know the remainder, you will need to revisit and read it. To commence this entry, last year my sister and Bill attended Thanksgiving at Bill's parents' residence instead of with my parents. My eldest nephew was not exactly at his best behavior there either, but he did not cause any trouble. At least that is what they conveyed to everyone. My sister and Bill also had an extensive discussion with our parents about how excluding my nephew would not aid his current mental state, and I also supported them on this, because given the circumstances, my nephew would only experience resentment. So my parents relented and permitted him to come to Christmas Eve. I, of course, purchased him a gift, but because I desired to assist him mentally in getting better, in early December, I acquired a used metallic green off-road bicycle at the local secondhand store. It required a minor amount of work, but was an excellent purchase for $30. I also discovered that since his decent knapsack had been stolen, he was utilizing an old one that belonged to one of his brothers, so I obtained a used one at the same secondhand store for approximately $5. I restored the bicycle and laundered the knapsack, and when I presented both to him on a Sunday, he appeared utterly astonished that I would give him anything, and it also made him very awkward, but he accepted both with a look that conveyed gratitude and immediately commenced utilizing them for commuting to and from school, just as he did with his previous bicycle and knapsack. My sister and Bill were also quite astonished that I gave him gifts, let alone replace the items that were stolen from him when he absconded after he assailed my residence with striking tools. However, the gifts had the desired effect. I was no longer the target of his animosity. He genuinely had been seeking any justification to portray me as the malevolent serpent who ruined his existence, but I am not. When I next encountered him, it was at the family Christmas Eve celebration, and while there, my sister and Bill compelled him to apologize for directing all his anger at me. They loomed over him like shadows as he conversed with me. He was instructed to maintain eye contact repeatedly, and in his apology, he admitted that it was not my fault he was apprehended, that he provoked me, that he pilfered from me, and that he damaged my property, and that he would not do it again. We shook hands, and he did not cause any disturbance at the gathering at all, but his parents were like his shadows throughout that entire evening. They did not leave him unsupervised at all. They might as well have had him on a leash. It was uncomfortable, but I can comprehend why they would risk so much simply so he could be permitted to attend Christmas. At New Year's, however, things took a downer. My eldest nephew purloined a bottle of sparkling wine from his parents and rapidly consumed it all while locked in the lavatory before anyone could intervene. He had previously requested a portion of it and was told he was too young, so he took one of the bottles and gulped it down. We were unaware of this until then, but apparently, he had been taking alcoholic beverages for some time before his first apprehension, and he maintained a hidden supply somewhere that gradually diminished as he only partook of it incrementally and even sold some of it to other youths in the neighborhood. He did not get into significant trouble. He was simply sent to his room for the evening after he stated he took the alcohol because he was simply truly craving it, and it was New Year's. His brothers admitted to their parents about his hidden supply and showed them where it was concealed. It was a plastic container in the crawl space beneath the house. When confronted about how they acquired all the alcoholic beverages, my two younger nephews admitted to following their brother's leadership and only took one beverage at a time or poured some strong alcohol from its original container into another container little by little. And then the biggest revelation. They had been clandestinely entering other people's residences and performing the same action throughout the neighborhood. Their method of unauthorized entry was to seek unlocked entrances and windows. No houses with canines because they would bark, and the youngest would crawl in through windows because he was the smallest, and then he would unlock the doors to permit his brother's entry. They ensured not to steal anything substantial from inside the houses so they could return multiple times, but after they were apprehended last year, they realized they no longer enjoyed being pilferers and were simply following their brother's leadership, as they had stated before. Of course, the youths were in difficulty for not admitting any of that until then, and despite attempts to keep it secret, the information still circulated somehow. It corroborated some of the neighbors' suspicions. Considering how adept my nephews were at being discreet burglars, one might think they would have been more mindful of surveillance devices, or perhaps they simply assumed old uncle would never acquire cameras. But after my nephews were exposed as pilferers, a few of my and my sister's neighbors also obtained surveillance equipment. The penalty for admitting how they took items was minor for my nephews. It was somewhat redundant for the eldest because he is still in difficulty with being on probation and so forth, and he had not attempted to steal anything else until he took the bottle of sparkling wine. My brother-in-law began providing him with numerous mint chewing gums to assist with his cravings, as it was what he used to help reduce his own alcohol consumption, and it somewhat helped. Bill also commenced keeping all his alcoholic beverages locked in a secured refrigerator in the garage. He suspects his son attempted to access it once. All of that aside, matters did not appear so dire until my eldest nephew became involved in an altercation at school in February. I am told he did not initiate it, but another youth provoked him until they began exchanging blows. He had his 2 front teeth dislodged by the bully when his face was forcefully struck against a locker. There ended up being a reason for this assault. My younger nephews informed me their older brother had a number of targets to torment at school before being apprehended. He was apparently the typical intimidator people envision when they think of one. He took things from other youths, targeted the small and the weak, struck them around when no one was looking, and on more than one occasion used a small cutting implement to puncture bicycle tires. Well, the older sibling of a youth he had previously tormented pursued him, and that boy severely injured him. Both of his upper front teeth were dislodged, and his nose was fractured. He had to be transported to the hospital, and an emergency oral surgeon had to reinsert his teeth, which also necessitated special orthodontic devices to hold them in place. His nose also required resetting, and he was placed in a neck brace. The unfortunate youth did not wish to be seen by anyone for months. No one filed charges. Believe me, I have inquired many times as to why not. But the other youth's parents paid at least half of the cost for my nephew's treatments for his teeth and nose through their insurance. That is what they conveyed to me anyway. My sister and Bill's health coverage was inadequate for covering the remainder, however, and they had a high copayment. They did not bother to submit anything because they did not wish to be in court again, and the other parents only paid as much as they did because they did not wish to be sued. I contributed a small amount to the cost as well. I still possessed the $500 they had given me in cash after I sued them and decided to return it to them to help alleviate the cost a little. They will not disclose to me how much it cost to repair my nephew's nose and reinsert his 2 front teeth, but after that, I believe they may have had no savings remaining. When I observed my nephew after the incident, his face was disfigured and his front teeth were wired in place. He refused to return to school and completed all his remaining coursework online with a school-provided laptop. The youth who beat him up, I was told, received nothing more than a 2-week suspension. I will not deny I was upset, but simultaneously, I know this only transpired because my nephew was an intimidator towards other youths. What goes around does eventually come around. We are currently in summer, and my eldest nephew is still largely confined indoors. He will venture out on his bicycle alone for an hour or two, but other than that, he generally keeps to himself in his room. There have been discussions between my sister and Bill about relocating closer to his parents after their son's probation concludes, and I do not fault them. Practically the entire neighborhood now dislikes them, so they wish to depart as soon as they can afford it, which unfortunately may require another year or so to accomplish. I have been dedicating more time to my 2 younger nephews, and they are doing significantly better now. They are more respectful and have been permitted back into my home. Nothing has gone missing, and I enjoy spending time with them, watching films and engaging in games. They have transformed into well-behaved youths again, and they are attempting to atone for their missteps. On the rare occasion I see my eldest nephew, he is no longer cold towards me. He even brought his bicycle to me for mending once. But he is a youth of few words now, almost stoically silent these days. I do know that when he is 18, he wishes to be far away from here. We have suggested vocational training, and he is not opposed to the concept. Beyond that, I have been striving my utmost not to overstep my role as an uncle, so that is all. After all this time, I may have nothing further to chronicle here.